Well, our lesson tonight and Sunday night, Sunday morning, whatever it is, will be on communication. We have a lot of things to cover. I would say to you that I think communication is one of the more important things as far as marriage is concerned. And I have thought about starting this class several ways, and I decided to start it this way. Have any of you ever experienced, what do I say? What do we talk about? I'm thinking about the married people primarily about this. How can I get him or her to talk to me? All she does is nag. He doesn't hear a word I say. I cannot believe anything he says. Why can't she just come out and say what she means? And then yada, yada, yada. I know none of you have ever experienced any of that yourself. Maybe you've seen other people who've experienced that. And we're going to, as I said, deal with communication. One of the reasons I think this is so important in marriage is because of all the things that some of us have experienced in marriage. Scott said last time that money was the major reason for problems in marriage. As I've read about things, it seems to be money is one, is one of them. I would put money, communication, and sex is probably the top three as you read about marriage and what to do about them. And I saw something the other day where an association of people who were marriage counselors had a 4-year study done. It went over 4 years, a lot of different people. And one of the results of that study was that communication was the biggest issue people had to deal with. And then shortly after that, I read where somebody who, and they didn't give his name, that he had been president of the Marriage Counselors of America, whatever that organization is. And he had said that 86% of all the troublesome marriages, communication was a major issue. So we're going to talk about communication tonight. And also, as I said, on Wednesday, there was a handout up there, and I'm going to sort of follow that handout if you've looked at that. And I just think that communication is important generally, and especially in marriage, because virtually everything in marriage is centered around communication. And first, we must be willing as husbands or wives to communicate. And I'll talk a little later. Talk and communication are not necessarily synonymous. In fact, I don't think they are at all. So today we're going to spend our time studying how best to communicate. And let me sort of do a disclaimer, I guess it is. I like to, whether it's teaching a class or making a sermon talk, I like to begin with a good many scriptures. Well, I'm violating that tonight. We're not going to do very many scriptures tonight, but if you look at the handout, there are a lot of scriptures in there, and we're going to do those on Sunday. But I will remind you, the first time I taught, I told you, I thought that sort of a theme for this group should be from Philippians 2 and verse 4, where it says, look not upon your own things, but look upon the things of others. And I think that certainly should be true as far as spouses are concerned. So I'm trying to stress the importance of communication in marriage. And as I look at this audience and I see how many married people we have in here, I assume I don't need to convince you of the importance of communication. But I'm going to anyway because I have notes and I need to get rid of them. First of all, married people must be willing to communicate. And I'm going to say this several times probably tonight. Communication and talking are not synonymous. We'll go into that in greater detail. Secondly, I believe that married people really believe that communication is important. And I have based that on observation, on discussions I've had with married couples through the years. So I think that people believe it's important. So if you really believe it's important, then you're going to try to work on that and how best to communicate. So in that regard, I see our class tonight to kind of be centered around motivation. What's going to motivate married couples to communicate more effectively. And maybe some of you who are married have already reached the climax as far as you have everything solved as far as communication is concerned. But in case you don't, we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. I really think communication, you must communicate in a marriage or the marriage won't live. And I know that's a strong statement, but I really believe that. If you don't communicate, you're in isolation. And I know we think about isolation a lot of somebody being isolated on a strange island or whatever. But let me tell you, isolation takes place in a lot of homes. You live in the same house, and again, don't anybody raise their hand about this. Have you ever experienced when maybe you're at odds a little bit with your mate, and you walk down the hallway, and the hallway is fairly narrow, and you make sure you don't touch the other one? I believe somebody has experienced that. So you can be isolated and live in the same household. But I don't have enough words to tell you how strongly I believe communication is as far as marriage is concerned. Communicate or your marriage will die. Communicate or your marriage will die. Communication, in my opinion, is the lifeblood for marriage. A lack of communication in a marriage leads to lonely times, to a stony silence, of a marriage that is void of any meaningful interaction. Communication in the home influences the direction of lives. And I know we're talking about husbands and wives, but it is equally important for those homes that have children. Communication in the home influences the direction of lives. It has an impact on children, and it certainly has an impact on the two participants in the home. And now that I've put all of you in kind of a dour mood, anybody want to say anything about communication in your home or in somebody else's home? Well, then let's go to point number 2 on the, if you have the handout. And point number 2 on there, and I'm so aggravated with myself about this. Point number 2, it says, what's communication? And I intended to put this in there. So those of you who are taking notes, add this in there. But I'm going to give it to you for just a minute. Communication is composed, as you know, of several things, or has several traits. And there are 3 that I wanted to mention there. And I first saw this a long time ago, and then I've seen it more recently again. And these are so-called experts in communication who talk about the 3 components or the 3 characteristics of communication, and then they attach a weight to each one of these. So the 3 are, the first one is content. You know, what it is you're trying to convey. The second one is tone of voice. And the third one is nonverbal. Now, according to more than one person, if you want to put percentages on this, out of 100%, how much of it do you think would be devoted to content? You have a percentage there.
5.
How much?
5.
20.
2? 5? What'd you all say over here?
20.
20.
About 10.
I'm sorry?
About 10.
About 10. Well, you are better than I thought you'd be. According to those who've done this research, it's 7%. Now, if you are teaching, or if you are making a speech, or if you're talking to your mate, what are you going to be concentrating on more of these 3?
Nonverbal.
Nonverbal, okay.
Body.
Huh? Okay, body language. You're not going to pay much attention to content?
Well, I think when you're like, I didn't, maybe missed what you're saying, but when you're preparing to communicate, I think
Yeah.
you focus on content.
Right.
And then tone of voice and nonverbal happens in the moment.
Okay.
If you don't think about it.
You do not think about it?
Yeah, right. I think when you prepare to do something,
Yeah.
you're focused on the content, but you're not preparing what's the tone, what's the
Yeah. So you spend a lot of time preparing the content. If I may give a personal example, long ago when I was working and I would have staff meetings, I would say to the staff, don't go out of here, and when you get out the door, say, well, what was he trying to say today? If you don't understand it, ask. Now, I wasn't necessarily reflecting on them totally, because I'm going to talk about listeners a little later, but just what we're talking about here. I realized sometimes I was unable to convey as well as I wanted to, maybe what I was trying to say. So the content is important about this. Tone of voice. Any of you ever been affected by tone of voice? When you were a child, did you know your parents' tone of voice? For those who are married, do you notice anything about your mate's tone of voice? Nobody wants to confess to that. Yes.
I have learned over the years, my husband works construction.
Right.
So 99% of people he works with are men. And I've learned that men talk differently to each other than men should talk to women.
Right.
So I've had to sometimes be like, wait a minute, let's redo this. Like I had to learn to take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
Because where he's at 90% of the time with the people that he works with, sometimes it kind of overlays into daily conversation.
So that's where he is.
Yep.
Anybody else have a tone of voice comment?
I think with text messages, you lose that, and a lot of things get misconstrued.
One of the really significant concerns that I have about those of you who are young is text messaging. I was going to talk about that, but now that you've, I will. I have seen some of you young couples. I saw one day, I was with, I can't remember whether they're in here or not. I was with this couple. She was right outside the front door of the house. He was in the kitchen. I could see both of them. They were about as far apart as we are here. And they were texting one another. And I thought, just stick your head out the door. Because do you get tone of voice when you text? Nope. And I really, that's another day, but I really do think that's a concern. The other thing, and I was going to pass this up, but I don't want to now. There, one of the problems is, and I will talk about this a little later maybe, is that men and women are quite different in a lot of ways, but also in communication. Now, please, women, don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. Research has shown, and you can always base things on research and then say, where'd you get it? That women speak about 7,000 words a day. Men speak about how many? 7. That men speak about 2. Now, that's not a reflection on either one, but it's a reality that you need to think about as far as how you do these things. What about body language? Body language very important in this? Sure it is. How do you read somebody's body language? How do you know then, if you don't know how to read it, how do you know whether it's a factor or not?
I'll have you have facial expressions. Smiling, or the little crow's feet that people have here when they're happy.
Okay. Yeah.
Or sad.
Say it, how you will. Sometimes it's how you stand, right? I heard this friend of mine a long time ago who went to one of the denominations in town, and he said, I get so aggravated our preacher, he preaches a good sermon, and then says, when he offers the invitation, rather than holding his hands like this, he goes up there like this, which, it's not real inviting. If you and your spouse, I've been trying to use mate rather than spouse. I really don't care for spouse as much, the term. Do you pay attention to your spouse's body language when you're having a discussion?
That's it when it's negative.
On your part or her part?
Never her part.
That's a
I mean, you notice negative body language more than you
Sure.
might notice
Yeah.
positive.
So anyway, not to wear this out, communication, and that goes to point number 2 on here. Point number 3, what is communication? I won't spend a lot of time on this. What is communication?
Exchanging of ideas.
Okay. Anything else? Any other thoughts about that?
Making sure you understand each other and
Okay.
you're aware of what they're feeling and thinking.
Yeah. Are you pretty good at that? That's all right. No.
No.
Oh, you're not?
That's why I got asked.
He's not? So he really needs his class.
Absolutely. I'll admit it.
Communication's talking and listening.
I'm sorry?
It's talking and listening.
Talking and listening. It is more than talking. Communication, talking may or may not be communication. And sometimes I've heard people say, well, he is a great speaker. A great speaker may not be a great communicator. And I should have said at the beginning, I don't come here tonight to tell you that I'm not an expert on this. I just have ideas about it. So you can take it with whatever. To me, here's what I think communication is, and you'll think that this is sort of goofy. Communication among humans occurs when one person stimulates a thought in the mind of another person or persons. Communication among humans occurs when one person stimulates a thought in the mind of another person. One of the people that has written a good bit, in fact, is this list of, on the second page by H. Norman Wright. Wright and Roberts wrote on communication, and they say that here's what communication is. Communication is the process of sharing yourself, verbally and non-verbally, in such a way that the other person can both accept and understand what you're saying. So that's not bad. In fact, that's pretty good. Then obviously, another important part of communication is listening. And listening has a lot to do with it. And I'll talk maybe some more about listening at another time. There's a passage I would just mention to us, and it's found in Proverbs 15 and verse 28. Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer. The heart of the righteous studies how to answer. But the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. And this may be misusing this passage just a little bit, I'm not sure. In Matthew 13:51, Christ had been talking to his disciples about the parables, and when he had gotten through, it was a fairly lengthy involvement there about the parables. And then he said to the disciples, do you understand what I've said to you? Which is, sort of like all the rest of us. Do you understand what I've said to you? We don't know the answer to that, but at least he posed that question. So, comments or questions or anything of these first 2 points on your outline? Anything you want to say? Well, then the third thing on there is communication between husbands and wives. And several things I want to mention here, and then we'll sort of go from this into the fourth item on your handout. First of all, what do you think should be the goal of husbands and wives with regard to communication? It would be a worthy goal.
Understanding.
Understanding?
Respect.
I'm sorry?
Respect.
Respect? By both, right?
Yes.
To strengthen the bond
Okay, sure.
between the husband and the wife.
Yeah. Strengthen the bond, in case you didn't hear that, between the husband and wife. What else?
With your one flesh.
You need to be of one mind from the
Okay.
standpoint of knowing, being on the same page, having the same goals.
Yeah. Scott said if you're one flesh, then you have the same goal. The term I want us to come to today, and this is going to be after we do this little part here, is transparency and openness with one another. When Lawrence and Janice, and I have been through their premarital things, But when Lawrence and Janice do that, who in here, who's been through the premarital with Lawrence and Janice? Anybody? Several of you. I think one of the things that they say, and then you all, this is all secondhand, they really talk about being open with one another and about your history and that sort of thing. So this is the being transparent is something that develops over a period of time. For those of you who haven't been married very long, you'll be in a different stage than you'll be when you've been married 50 years if you're still together. It's an important kind of thing, the transparency. In Genesis 2:25, you remember that God had created Adam and Eve, and they went into the garden, and they were naked, and they were open with one another. Some people take that passage and the passage in chapter 3 and verse 7, where sin had entered the world, and there was lying and deceit and all the things that went with the fall of man, that then they were covered one another up. And some view those passages being more than just the physical covering, but since sin had entered in, then they were not as open with one another as they might have been. And that may be correct, I'm not sure. And part of being open, just keep in mind that some of us, some people develop veneers, they develop facades, they develop some way of covering up so that things that they don't want to share, they hide from their mates. But the objective should be transparent. Then if you have your outline, look at number 4 about levels of communication. Let me tell you the background of that. This is from a book, and the name of the book is mentioned there, but Why Am I Afraid to Tell Who I Am, by a man by the name of Powell, P-O-W-E-L. That book, I think, was initially printed in London, or in England rather, in 1965. Then it was first printed here in this country in 1975, and we're a long way from that time, but it's continued to be around. And he does something that I think is appropriate for our session here today. And this is where he talks about 5 levels of communication. I want to go through these quickly with you and talk about each one of them just a little bit. And then it, I think, helps each one of us look at ourselves and see where we are on one of these levels of communication. The first level, or the 5th level, the first one on there is cliche. Cliche. Now that's what I call elevator talk. And you know, particularly if you're in a strange place and you get in an elevator and there are other people in there, what's kind of the atmosphere?
Don't talk or talk about the weather.
Yeah, or people talk about the weather, people look at the ceiling, they look at the floor. I would tell you all hurriedly, one of the things I've liked to do through the years, and I'm always careful about this because I don't want to get security to be called. But sometimes if there's several people in there, and if it's just me and women, I never say a word because I think I've got to be careful about this. But sometimes I'll say things that they have to respond to, and you see people going, "What? This is a strange guy in here with us." So anyway, in an elevator, the key to these levels is what you share about yourself. So in this level, elevator talk, what do you share? Nothing. You're not there. The next one, level 4, reporting the facts. It's kind of like the afternoon news. You're sharing what you know. You make reference to others, maybe gossip, little or no reference to you, and you don't make any kind of a commitment. There is maybe a wee bit of sharing about who you are. And then level 3, ideas and judgment. This has to do with the opinion. And the person begins to open up a little bit at this level. They step out of their confinement. They share ideas and thoughts, reveals a little bit about themselves, but they're very careful. And then Powell says at this level, if you reveal a little bit about yourself and the person reacts adversely, then you withdraw from that. And you go back out of the elevator talk at that point. And then level 2, number 4, feelings and emotions. Person shares how they feel about facts, about ideas, about judgments, and they begin to reveal a little bit about themselves. So they're making progress as far as sharing is concerned. They're coming out of their safe positions. Powell refers to this as gut level communication. So there's some sharing of feeling then when you get to level 2. Then the one we want to talk about just a little bit is level 1, and this is complete emotional and personal communication. He doesn't use the word, but this is where I would put the word transparent. To become transparent. There's a deep relationship that must be based on absolute openness and honesty. It takes time. It's difficult. It involves risk. Why would it involve risk? Huh? If you reveal some things about yourself, then if the person you're revealing this to is not what they should be, they use that against you. So there is some risk to this. They may be rejected. Now, this kind of, this level of communication requires a deep degree of trust, and love should create an atmosphere of openness. So I would just say to us, as far as marriage is concerned, that marriage is, should be ultimately at this level, and you just need to, as a couple, you just need to ask one another, where are you in your relationship with the mate you're to? And I guess for those who are not married but might be in the market at some point, you know, you would want to think about some of these things when you are getting close to another person. Now, I want to. This is a caution. This is a caution. A person who's married should be very careful about being at this level of communication with somebody of the opposite gender. And if you think about that, that's not as far-fetched as it might sound. You know, if you're in the workplace, if there's somebody you work with every day who is of the opposite gender, you obviously share a lot of things. And you know, if each of you have a family, you have children, you've got pictures on your desk of these people or whatever, and they say, well, who's this, what's that? You say, well, her name's Sarah, and she's a delightful person, or whatever it might be. So you know, it is all being done in innocence, but it is a caution that married people need to note about. Then the other thing I would say, and I may be stoned by the men on this, I think men generally find it awkward and difficult to open up. Men do not show emotions as easily and as freely as women do. And if some of you men want to object to that, you have the floor. Time's up. But remember, men, Jesus showed emotion. We always use this passage in John 11:35, where he wept when Lazarus died. But then there's a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 4, when Paul had written to the church there at Corinth the second time, and he said, out of much affliction or tribulation of heart, I wrote to you. And he did this so they would know that he had his love for them. So maybe men are better than I think we are about showing emotion and tenderness. Husbands and wives, openness and transparency is needed, and in many cases is sadly lacking. So it requires trust and love, and makes a person vulnerable. Even in a marriage it does. So we need to think about that. Now, that's through the first page of the handout. What comments you want to make, Richard?
Well, I didn't know where this went, but I've thought about it a couple of times. One thing that is that I've learned, and I didn't. It took me many years to figure it out. So I'll share it in case there's anybody else that hasn't learned it yet. Encourage them to try it. But you talked earlier at the very beginning. You read some phrases, and one that resonated is, you know, I wish you would tell me, you know, whatever. And
Right.
so one thing that you know, there'd be times where through body language more than actually, or tone, maybe tone, but I would be like, something's up. Something's on her mind. So I was like, and I would just be like, you know, I would just think, when I think about a guy, I would be like, well, you know, tomorrow she'll forget about it. But that's not the case typically. And so what I've over the last, I don't know, 7 or 10 years or so, at some point about halfway through our marriage, I figured it out. I'm just going to ask her, hey, is something up? And what I found is sometimes there's not. Sometimes I misread the body language. And then great. Now I'm not worried about, thinking there's something up and I've created something. But sometimes it's, yes, it is, and here's what it is. And I'm like, oh, had no idea I did that thing. Thanks for telling me. We could resolve it, ask forgiveness, and move on. And then sometimes it's, yeah, I'm upset, but I don't know why I'm upset, so let me think about it. And then it causes her to address it, think about it, and then someone's like, you know what? And then she moves on, even though there wasn't anything. And so one of those, almost every single time, one of those three things comes from that. And I think for a long time I was afraid to ask. Well, I don't want to open that can of worms up. I don't want to deal with it. I don't know what it is. And so, I don't know. Many years ago, I started just doing that, and that has been fantastic to just say, and I'll say, hey, now by the way, you could also just tell me up front, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you if you don't. And so there's, a lot of times I'll say, and we have this, we call it the proverbial wall. If things go on a wall.
Oh,
if things don't get done, they build up, and then we don't even know. She doesn't know why she's upset. So that's something that we've done over the last, like say, 7 or 10 years, and it has been fantastic for getting through that communication. Just just me saying, hey, is something up? Is something going on?
Any of you women want to respond to Richard?
I would say that the way that they approach it, so it's not like, what's wrong with you? But, hey, what's going on? Because you can say that, but you got to watch your tone and your body language, because then it can start.
Yeah, if I get to it Sunday, there's some things that I want to suggest, some phrases like that, rather than what's wrong with you. If you say that to your wife, she may say it's because I'm married to you. That's the problem.
I think my phrase is, are we good?
Yeah.
Are we good?
Are we good?
Okay. Let's figure out why we're not good.
And then if she says no, but not going to tell you why, then you've got another problem.
I don't know that she's ever said that. I'm not going to tell you. She might say, I don't know why.
Yeah,
Let me
but
think
you're
about it.
fortunate. She's a really nice person. Yeah.
I found that my husband is very, very quiet man, and I have found over time that he keeps things to himself. Like I thought that I didn't think he would keep. I always felt like he was he's always a very honest man, but he also keeps things to himself, and sometimes he becomes transparent in times that I wish he wouldn't. Just for instance, like we were having an issue with one of our children being a picky eater, and all of a sudden Michael says, well, I've eaten your mother's Brussels sprouts for 10 years, and I didn't ever tell her I didn't like them. And
Well, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that. I thought he enjoyed them because he always ate them. But when he said that, in front of the kids, and I felt I was took aback by it because I kind of felt really embarrassed. So I was like, please don't become transparent. Don't say those things and be honest when I don't know them already.
Tyler?
I'm in the non-married group, so I may not know
Yeah,
much.
we know. Yeah.
But I've been in a relationship for 2 years. The biggest thing I've realized for myself when it comes to a lack of communication is because of my pride. And that's kind of like we've called the root of a lot of the topics we talked about is because we can't swallow our pride on something. And,
Yeah.
I think it's level 1, complete emotional and personal transparency comes down to can you swallow your pride enough to be open enough? Because you need that help. And sometimes it might be something that you're ashamed of. But if you can just, communicate with humility, it'll grow your relationship. So.
Tyler says that to be in level 1, you need to swallow your pride. What else? Anything else?
I think good communication takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. You've got to spend time together, go for a walk together. Sometimes it doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah.
And so time is extremely important. There's another passage I wanted to share.
Go ahead.
From Paul.
Yeah.
In his 2 Corinthians 6, and he's talking to the church there.
Speak up just a little more for these people out here.
He says, we have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children. Open wide your hearts also.
Yeah.
He's saying we've opened our hearts to you freely. Please open your hearts back to us in exchange. Paul and Jesus both speak very emotionally
Very good. Sunday, I want to deal with some practical, excuse me, some practical kinds of things like this. We've got about 6 more minutes before I'm going to some other things. Anybody else have anything you want to say? I want to echo what Brother Smith has said here, and that is, and particularly for those of you who are younger and some of you who are not married or early into marriage, you know, these things are not going to come quickly in your marriage. You have to get, I don't care if you dated for 10 years, you still don't know the person. Well, maybe after 10 years you would, but you know, you don't know the person as well as you will after you've been married just a short period of time. So this takes time to get to that. John?
Well, and along that line too, Paul, not all of us grew up in homes where communication was open. And so we've got a lot to learn.
Yes.
And it takes longer for people who didn't grow up in that atmosphere than it does for people who did see some of that in their home.
Yeah, and John's saying that some of us didn't grow up in open, where communication was open. As I said, the first lesson I taught in here, you know, if you go way back, and I go way back, you know, first of all, there were not classes like this as far as churches were concerned. There were not sermons about how to raise children and how to get along in a marriage. Then homes, when I was a kid, when I was a young person, a teenager, parents really didn't say much to you, I love you. You know, you knew they loved you because of the things they did for you, but it just wasn't something that was done very much in that period of time. So I think, and it should be true of homes of Christians should be open. And you would learn this, you know, you would be born into an openness that was not true some generations ago. Let me mention a couple other things till we, let's see, we talked about body language, how do we communicate, body language, gifts, kindnesses, shows of emotion, both anger, love, joy, and sadness. And then we use words, and this is where I'm probably going to begin on Sunday. Words may be our best and worst friends. Those are the best and worst tools that we have. I don't know how many of you in here would get when Jerry Earnhardt was living, if you got a card from Jerry Earnhardt to me was able to convey in a few words a feeling to a greater extent than anybody I think I've ever known.
Beautiful.
You know, you read that and that was just a part of Jerry. So words are like that. In thinking about words, I think about the passage in Job 19 and verse 2. Job's friends have come. And he says, they say all these great things to him. You know, they're friends. And he says in 19 and 2, how long will you torment my soul and break me into pieces with words? Scott had mentioned the other day, you know, he used to say to kids, sticks and stones can't, what is it, don't hurt me, but however that goes. Well, it ain't right, because words really do hurt. Dennis and Barbara Rainey have written a number of books about marriage and that sort of thing. And here's what they say. Words are like seeds. Once planted in the life of a mate, they bring forth flowers or weeds, health or disease, healing or poison. Words heal or spread disease in a marriage. And I think that is a really telling kind of thing about words. Words just, it's probably the best thing we have to communicate with as far as content's concerned, but we need to work on how we use those. One of the things I've said to people, rather than saying, well, why did you do that way? You know, say, if you need to admonish them, say, have you ever considered? Or rather than saying, I think that's terrible. You know, you say something like, it seems to me, and Sunday I'm going to talk a little bit about emotive words, and we need to think about those. And husbands and wives have more opportunity to harpoon one another with words than anybody, because they're together more. And in the workplace, you know, you have times where you get together and you have an expert that comes in and talks to you about how to communicate or how not to communicate. Well, it's even more important as far as our homes are concerned. And then for those who have children or will have children, just remember, children are learning how to be a mate from the home they're being reared in. And that's kind of a scary thought. So remember, those of you who have children, or going to have children, there is that added responsibility. Not only do you have to put up with some ornery man, but you have to teach your daughters that they might find themselves in the same situation. I'm being a little facetious about ornery, but anyway, there we are. Okay, we're going to begin Sunday talking about practical suggestions for communication, and also talk about listening. And then we're going to go to looking at a number of scriptures. This is number 6 on the handout, and then we will do the attachment that's here. So rather than starting into those with a minute or two to go, I'm going to quit. What else? What else somebody has that they just got to say? Nobody has anything else they just have to say. Myra, I'm sorry, Myra, raise her hand.
I've got a degree in speech communication, and one of the first things I took at Western was an interpersonal communication class.
Yep.
And I'll never forget the very first thing that she told us. She said, you cannot not communicate.
That's right.
So you're always communicating.
You're going to communicate.
So it can be good or bad.
Even if you say nothing, you're communicating. Myra?
I was thinking a lot of what John said too about people growing up in homes where love is not. I think the other thing that's real important is a lot of people grow up in homes where there were not role models of a wife or a husband.
Yeah.
And in Christian homes even, they can grow up seeing someone. And so that can't be helped maybe, but that is definitely something to consider and, help with.
Good. Well, I've kind of berated you all a little bit. Everybody looked a little bit downcast. Just go out and do. What's that?
I would just say as an encouragement to to all the men in here, because this is, something that I obviously was not good at. You can ask.
Make sure they can hear you
on.
over here.
Do what?
Make sure they can hear you over here.
Well, I was not the best communicator in the world early on. I'm not saying I am now, but one thing is clear, is just how important it is to women. I know we've kind of talked about that. It's very similar. You mentioned early on different problems in marriage. The way that men and women look at the sexual relationship is very different in what the needs are for each. And it's that same way with communication. And it's polar opposites. And so as men, we just have to recognize it is a difference, it is important, and have to take steps to focus on it.
Very good.
And then
Thank you
added
all.
to
I'm
that-
sorry, well, Perry has that ego back.
Sorry, no, added to that, we are different, but it's God designed, so our differences are good.
Your differences are good.
Our differences are good, so rather than getting mad at him for not being me, I need to see it as good and a benefit to me that he's not like me. It's God's design.
All right. Thank you all.